All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are joined my name is Nick. I'm with the Chamber of Commerce here, and we're joined by our friends at Ahola to talk about our second Business Edge event of the year. Today, we're going to be talking about bridging the generational gap in the workplace. And we have Tina Stuart-McGinty and Jordan Appelhans from Ahola who are going to kick us off and lead us through the conversation. Thank you all again for joining us. And Tina and Jordan, I will just send it over to you guys. This event is being recorded as well, so it'll be sent out after we are finished today for those who are listening. So thanks for joining us. And Jordan and Tina, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. So as Nick said, we're going to be talking about bridging generational gaps in the workplace, talking about some practical leadership strategies for multi-generational teams. Just a little bit more of a quick background on Jordan and I. So yes, my name is Tina Stuart-McGinty. I have my senior professional HR certification through HRCI. I'm an HR consultant with the Ahola Corporation. I've been here for about the last 4 years. Jordan?
I am the senior HCM consultant, and I've been here 4 years as well in the Columbus market, and I absolutely love it here.
Awesome.
Okay, so just to give you a little bit of a background on Ahola, we are family owned. We've actually been in business. The number on the slide is out of date. We are on 59 years in business, and next year we will be celebrating 60, which is awesome. Like I said, family owned. We are getting ready to go on the third generation of family ownership. And then once that happens, we will also be women owned because Sonia Holo will be taking over, which is really exciting. We started out in the Brecksville area, which is just south of Cleveland, with Mom and Papa Hola starting it out of the back of their trunk. And then there were four kids have taken over and really helped grow that business. And like I said, we've expanded into Columbus, which I'm really excited about. We help you from everything from hire to retire on the payroll side of it, but my favorite part is the HR because our proactive team is absolutely amazing.
Thanks,
And I'm
Jordan.
not just saying it because she's here on this with us. I truly do feel that.
Thank you. So before we begin, just a quick legal disclaimer. Jordan and I are not attorneys. So this session is intended to be educational and informational for you, and we do hope that you take something out of it. But in no way should any of the information that we share with you today be construed as legal advice. So for our agenda, when we look at today's workforce, many organizations have 4 or 5 generations working side by side, right? And as that happens, we're looking at things like different communication styles, different workplace expectations, motivations, perspectives. And in general, anytime you have groups of people working together, there's naturally going to be conflict. It's just kind of something that happens. But we are going to take a look today at the generational perspective of that. So we're going to start by defining and understanding what the generations are. We're going to talk about some common generational workplace challenges. We're going to talk about things that all employees want in the workplace. And then we're going to talk about some of those practical leadership strategies that you can use within your own organization. And of course, we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So to kick us off, I wanted to share this statistic. So this came from the Society for HR Management from a 2026 evaluation they did. And so they asked chief human resource officers to predict how they felt labor trends in the world of work would change in 2026. And 47% of them, so almost half, stated that they anticipated that they would be addressing challenges and opportunities of managing multi-generational workforces. So just something to show, again, this is something that's very prevalent, and this is something that is on a lot of people's minds as we kind of transition to the rest of our slides here today. So before we kind of get into the content, I really wanted to start with this because these are all specific things that I have heard people say in a professional environment over the last several years. So I kind of wanted to bring up these generational myths and talk about what the true reality is behind them, just as a way to kind of kick us off today. So the first one, I hear this a lot. Younger employees don't want to work. Gen Z doesn't want to work. That's not the reality. The reality is that many younger generations are highly motivated, but they define success differently than previous generations did. So they often want different things out of work that wasn't maybe not have even been options for people in older generations, right? Things like flexible work, meaningful work, things that they can feel a purpose for, seeking transparency from leaders, right? These are types of things that younger generations are looking for, and they're going to be picky about it. So because they have an opportunity to be picky, sometimes it appears that, oh, well, they just don't want to work, they don't want that. And when the reality is that they're just pickier about how the work and what they choose to do fits into their life and their morals and what it is that they want out of work. The second, I hear this a lot too, older employees resist change. They don't know how to change. And this one makes me laugh a lot because if we actually look at all of the generations, the ones that have had to go through the most change are the older generations, right? The reality is that they have lived all the changes and they've already been through it. So we can't say that they resist change. They've had to do it time and time again throughout their careers. So I always laugh. My husband's godmother, she worked at the same place her entire career. But when you talk to her about her career, she started work when it was common. They just had phone and they sent things through the mail, right? And that was it. And then she saw, they brought in like fax machines, right? And had to adjust to that technology, eventually moving on to email, this type of communication, right? These virtual conferences and stuff like that, right? So she has like lived and seen through all different types of things through the course of her career. And that's just the reality of what older generations had to do. But they also had to deal with a lot of things like industry disruptions, right? And they had to figure out how to navigate that. So a quick example of that could be like Netflix and streaming services. I mean, you don't see a Blockbuster anymore. You can't rent videos anymore, right? Those things completely disrupted industries. And older generations were the ones that had to figure out how to pivot and adjust to those disruptions over time. So I always feel like that's a funny thing for people to say when really those are the groups that are most experienced at going through change. And if there
Maybe
is,
they're just tired of it.
but there still could be resistance. But usually that comes from things like, again, poor implementation, lack of communication, concerns about impact. But nobody's really asking maybe, hey, why are you pushing back on this? Or why are you resistant? They're just making an assumption it's because they're older. Right? And that's not fair and something that we'll get throughout the presentation today. Number three, millennials need constant praise. Again, not true. Typically, what millennials and other younger folks coming into the workplace are really looking for are clear expectations, coaching, development conversations, and opportunities. And there's a huge difference between tell me I'm great and tell me how I'm doing, right? And getting that feedback is what drives people to do better. And if you're not telling folks how they're doing, they don't know. But a lot of us, want to know how am I doing? Can I do better? What can I be doing differently? And it's not seeking praise, it's seeking ways for us to be better employees.
To be coachable. And I do have a comment for the millennials needing praise. We were not the ones giving ourselves the participation trophies. That was the generation before us.
And then number four is baby boomers are bad with technology. So this kind of ties into number two. But again, technology proficiency has less to do with age than it does exposure and training to it, right? There's a ton of experienced employees that are highly proficient in their workplace systems, right? And there's younger folks that are maybe more proficient in things like social media and AI. And it's just kind of a matter of what you had available, again, to you at the time. So technology skills are learned, they're not inherited, right? And so it takes time for everybody to adjust to new technology. And that's just the reality. So to say that that's segmented to a particular group of people really is unfair. So again, as we kind of dive into stuff today, wanted to start off with some myths as a way to kind of shake things up a little bit. And we're going to talk about these, and you'll see some of these themes throughout the conversation today. So let's take a look at the generations as a whole. So a generation itself is kind of defined as a group of people born around the same time who experience similar cultural events. So think wars, economic crashes, a pandemic, civil rights movement, right? Groups of people who are similar in age that are experiencing these things at the same like phase of life, right? And how that impacts them impacts a lot of other things in their life, right? So here we've got baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. They're making up about 15% of their share of the workplace, followed by Gen X, born between 1965 and 1980, making up about 31% of the workforce. Millennials inching in, taking the lead a little bit, 1981 to 1996 with 36% share of the generational workforce. And then Gen Z is kind of wrapping us up with born between 1997 and 2012, making up 18%. The two generations you don't see here, the one preceding baby boomers, we call that the silent generation. They're born between the mid 20s and about 1945. Some of them are still in the workforce. They make up about a 1-ish% share, right? So some of them are still in the workforce. And then we have Generation Alpha. And so that's the one that's following Gen Z, born in 2013 through now. So here in the next few years, we're going to see them starting to enter the workforce as well. So taking a look at the four that are here on the chart, though, it is not uncommon for any workplace to have members of all four of these generations working for them at the same time. And again, as I mentioned, some may even have five. So what we're looking at in a workplace is that there is more generational diversity now than there has ever been before. But why? A lot of that has to do with advances in science and medicine, right? We have longer lifespans now. But it's not just that, right? So sure, longer lifespan, that kind of pushes the age of Social Security eligibility. That in and of itself kind of forces people to work longer, but that's not the only reason. We will see many older people in the workforce who just want to work. I know plenty of people that retired and went back to work because they wanted something to do. They wanted to continue to add value. They enjoy working. They like being with people. And so they went back to work as something to do to occupy themselves, to help them feel fulfilled and have purpose in their life, right? But we do find that there are groups of people who had to go back to work or had to stay and work longer from a financial perspective, right? A lot of people are facing financial challenges now, and that's just a reality. And so some people are remaining employed past retirement age because they have to. And still there's a group that maybe did retire and had to go back because of those financial challenges. So whether it's, desire, because of the pushed retirement age or a financial reason, again, what we're seeing, the reality is that people are working much longer than they've had in the past. However, looking at it from a diversity perspective, in HR, we talk about diversity a lot, and people traditionally think about that as, diversity in nationality, in race, in gender. People don't always think about it from an age perspective or a generation perspective, but there is a benefit of that in the organization as well that we'll get through today. And before we proceed to some of the challenges that we're going to talk about, I want you to think about a couple of these considerations because I think they're important when you're trying to understand your own workforce. So the first is that every generation is in a different phase of life. So some are just starting to get married. Some are just starting their families.
All right, let me
Others are
send this to
reducing
Erica. Thank you so
hours,
much
are
for your
looking
help. I
to
appreciate
retire.
it.
And there's some others still that are
Bye-bye.
starting their careers. But everybody's at a different part of their life. They're at a different phase of their life. And that's important because, again, that is what impacts what it is that we're doing and what it is that we want out of work. The next is that not all members of a generation fit into the same box, right? Just as we wouldn't bucket and say all women want this or all blank wants that, right? We shouldn't do that with age either and assume that everybody of one generation wants and needs the same things because those are going to be different as well. We need to make sure that we're treating people as individuals and that we're challenging those stereotypes. And then finally, this is one that I think maybe leads to some of the friction that we're about to talk about, right? And that's that people tend to view things from their own perspective, from their generation and not the other person's. And so they don't always maybe appreciate where the other person's coming from. So the one example I can give for this is that something that I've heard a lot is some people say, well, when I was their age, I had a car, I had a home, and I already had a family, right? And so that's an example of somebody looking at somebody else and their age, but looking at it through the perspective of their generation, what they had accomplished at that point in time, not taking into account the world is very different now than it was 30, 40 years ago, right? People are starting families later. People have different priorities now. Some people are choosing not to have families at all when at a different point in time, that was very much an expectation. So we want to make sure that we're not trying to just look at people through our own lens, but that we're trying to appreciate things that have changed over time because starting a career now versus starting a career 50 years ago is completely different. The hiring process is different. The tools you're using are different. Some of the laws are even different, right? But it's the same for retiring. That looks different now than it did 50, 40 years ago. So sometimes I feel like this is what crops up and leads to some of that conflict that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, like Tina, to add to that is something people
Yeah.
don't you don't think about all the there's more bills, I feel like now that younger people are having, because it's not like everybody didn't have a cell phone back when maybe they were younger and have to pay that bill, or just everything new that's out there that you kind of have to be a part of society.
Sure. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about here is communication. So this is the big one. I would say this is one of the biggest areas of friction that people experience in the workplace because everybody, regardless of your generation, has a preferred communication style, and it may not be the same as your manager or the same as the other people on your teams. However, studies do find that there are generational trends in this area, right? So older generation studies have found do prefer to be more formal in their communication. They prefer face-to-face communication when they can do it, or maybe like over the phone. Whereas younger generations prefer more of that quick feedback, that quick conversation. So a text message, an instant message, and they're a lot more casual in their conversation. The point is that leaders need to try to understand the communication styles and preferences among their team and use that information to build a more cohesive culture. And I understand, as with anything, that's easier said than done. Because even without generational preferences, um, again, challenges in communication can impact your team regardless. That can lead to misunderstandings and miscommunications. When that stuff is not managed, it leads to very real conflict in your workplace. But having that effective communication is really going to directly impact how your team works together, how they learn, how they challenge each other, how they address situations that might come up, right? And so trying to figure out what makes sense to the rest of your team is going to be really important. So, for example, someone being quiet in a meeting, somebody might look at that person and think they're disengaged, they're not even paying attention. When really that person feels that they're very engaged, they're actively listening, they're taking notes, they're thinking about what's being said, they're focusing on the listener. They're not saying anything, but they're very much actively engaged in that meeting. And again, it's not a right or a wrong thing, it's a perspective thing. And that's what I'm trying to get to, right? These are the things that we need to understand with people. Similar to somebody who sends a quick response to an email. One person might think that they're being dismissive, but that person sees it as, hey, just wanted to let you know I got it, I'm working on it, right? So it's just a matter of perspective, which is going to be very important in our conversation today. And in general, communication preferences, I don't know why there's an echo. Are we good? Okay.
I think so.
Generational communication preferences tend to be, again, related and driven by the influences in the world at the time that we were growing up, right? So again, as I said, so younger generations coming up with social media and those types of things, that's very common for them. That's very easy for them. But each generation has lived through different unique experiences, and those are very real. And again, they can lead to trends, but don't always define what actually motivates people. It just kind of maybe explains how they're operating. And again, so individual preferences are going to vary within any particular generation that you have. So we can't just make those sweeping assumptions. And regardless of preference for how we want to communicate, the reality is that we're all in the same boat now, right? We're all expected to answer email, to answer Teams and Slack messages, to be able to communicate in this fashion here, like we are on a virtual meeting, right? Everybody's expected to know these things. The difference is that for some of us, this is how it's been our entire career. And for others of us, this is something we've had to learn along the way. Okay, so number 2, workplace flexibility. So have you ever heard anybody say, so-and-so is always on vacation, or so-and-so never comes into the office, right? People are paying attention to what others are doing. And flexibility is something that gets a lot of chatter, especially after COVID, right? Where they were able to, they sent us all home, and then they pulled us all back. And different generations have different expectations on what workplace flexibility should look like. So again, people that might be having families, raising children, they might want flexibility that looks more like time off or parental leave, and somebody else might want that in a different capacity. But some of the examples of frustration that could come up here is, again, people thinking you need to be in the office in order to do your work. Where other people are going to think, well, I don't care where I get my work done as long as I do it and I do it well. And both people in these scenarios have the desire for good work to be completed, but they have different expectations on when and where it should be completed. Again, someone might choose not to answer emails after hours or on the weekend as a way to protect their work-life balance, where somebody else may be coming from a perspective where, no, I need to respond right away because that shows I'm committed to my job. And if other people aren't doing that, they're not as committed as me. Right. And so this is where we start to see some of these frictions because people have different perspectives on how people should be using their time, or, those people that say, I still have all my vacation hours and it's November and they never took any of their time off and they kind of use that as a way to show I'm more dedicated to my work than other people, right? And that's not necessarily what that means. And so again, these different perspectives lead to that churn and that friction within the workplace. Number 3, technology and change. This is usually just what people call the general conversation of change and adaptability, right? And I've seen this one come up a lot. Again, where many younger generations think those older generations can't adapt, and sometimes older generations might think that younger generations are on technology too much and we rely on it too much. But again, I've also seen the inverse of this. So this just goes back to show that we can't bucket people into specific stereotypes. But again, where we may appear to, or what appears as a struggle or resistance is usually just more of a desire to learn, to understand why it's needed, to fully understand what the system is and how it works. And so the best example I can give for this is probably AI, right? Some people embrace it. They're using it every day. They're asking it what they should have for dinner, right? And
Don't call me
they've
out like
just,
that.
and so they've just like latched onto it. And there's other groups of people that shy away from it for a multitude of reasons. And that could be job impacts, job security concerns, data security. What's it doing with this information? How accurate is this information? And they may not want to use it. But unless you're going to ask the question of somebody who appears to be resistant to something like that, like, hey, why are you resistant? Tell me a little bit about your thought process. What's going on? You're going to assume perhaps it's because they don't know how to do it or they don't want to do it, or you're going to make up some assumption in your head instead of actually asking the questions and figuring out what their concerns are. And then lastly, we have feedback and performance management. So again, some people came into the workforce where feedback was infrequent, being independent was extremely valued, and managers only stepped in when something was wrong or when they needed to fix something. And others came into the workforce expecting that ongoing coaching. Tell me how I'm doing. Give me some development opportunities. What's my feedback? And if you've got a mismatch of that expectation, perhaps between a manager and an employee, that's going to cause some friction too. Because you might have a newer employee who's saying, hey, give me some feedback. How am I doing? How did I do on that project? And maybe the manager is feeling that that person just needs constant reassurance. When again, as we talked about earlier, that's not what they're looking for. On the flip side, you might have a manager who feels they're giving very direct and straightforward feedback, and maybe the employee feels that they're being too harsh. Right. So again, it goes back to trying to understand your workforce and what their expectations are, how they appreciate recognition, feedback, and those types of things to help alleviate some of these issues. So what we're going to transition into here are things that I think we can all agree on are things that people want in the workplace, right? And so again, a lot of these things that we were talking about as conflicts before are actually some of these things just kind of woven in and maybe, again, mislabeled as being something else. So the first one is respect. I think we can all get on the bandwagon for that, right? Employees want to feel valued, they want to know they're respected, and they want to be treated professionally. That looks differently to different people, though, right? For some people, that's, hey, my boss listens to my ideas. For other people, that's being included in a discussion. For somebody else, that's just feeling like they're being treated consistently with other people. So something to ask your teams is, do you feel that your opinion matters? Do you feel that you're respected? To kind of bring some of that to light. The next one is
Something
clear.
else
Oh, yeah.
I was gonna add for the respect one I found like pretty interesting recently. It was one of my clients I was talking to, like their employees, how they feel respected is a simply like when they come in when their superiors come in the morning is just simply saying good morning. They don't have to say anything, like have a full-on conversation, but it makes them feel like they're not less than in there. And I found that I'm like, you know what, that's very interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that feel that way.
Definitely. Yeah. And a lot of these things don't take a lot of effort, right? It's just, but again, to your point, Jordan, it's that they understood, right? That their employees feel respected when they're being acknowledged by people in a superior position, right? And that was enough for them to feel respected in the workplace. Um, the second one is clear communication. So again, setting expectations, outlining priorities, being open and transparent about change. I always say when in doubt, communicate more than you think you need to. Um, and just make sure that people are being heard. The next one is fairness. So applying things consistently, especially policies, this is very, very important because your employees will talk. And if you are not consistently applying policies, they will find out. They will be disgruntled and they will let you know about it. So you need to make sure that, all of your managers are managing to the same policies the same way, making sure that opportunities are distributed equally. So there's not the perception that somebody else is getting preferential treatment because perception really matters in the workplace. And even if something's not meant to be malintent of any type, or, there's not really any perceived bias going on, but if somebody feels that there is, it's going to be a big deal, right? And it's going to cause some problems within your organization. So organizations really need to be mindful that they have true business reasons behind the decisions that they're making. Growth opportunities. This is a big one because there used to be a point in time where the growth opportunity was expected as a step up, that upward trajectory within your career, right? And that's not what it looks like for everybody. And me being one of them, I am not a person that wants to be in the C-suite. I'm not looking to climb up, 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 right? But I still want growth opportunities. I still want new challenges. I want more responsibility, and I want to get that depth and that breadth within my role. But I don't necessarily want to climb up my entire career. That's not what I'm looking for. So this is a big one where there can be some misconceptions of what people should expect. And do people look at me differently and think that I'm not motivated because I don't want to be a manager or I don't want to be an executive, right? To me, that would be an unfair judgment of me because I'm very motivated in my career. That's just not what I want. The next is flexibility. So we're going to keep talking about this one too, because this one still comes up a lot. And a lot of times this is seen as a generational issue, but again, everybody in any generation appreciates some level of flexibility, whether that's being able to go back to school, childcare responsibilities, elder care responsibilities, time off for appointments, just vacation in general, right? We all want flexibility to some degree. It's just a matter of what that looks like. The next is recognition. Everybody wants to know that their efforts matter, right? Some people might appreciate public recognition, that you're in a town hall, an all hands meeting, and everybody's clapping because they did something great. And for some people, they don't want anything to do with that, right? They want you to just give them a pat on the back privately, give them a thank you card, something else. And again, just because we have different appreciations and expectations for how we get these things shouldn't be a reason for conflict. It should be a reason for conversation. Purpose comes next. Again, this is going to look different for different groups of people. Some people are going to get purpose from your organization's mission and just knowing that they're part of something bigger than them. For some people, it's going to be something as simple as helping a customer or helping a teammate. Some people love to solve problems, right? The importance is that we're recognizing that people have different identifications, definitions of what purpose means and what it means to them. And the way you work with that as an organization is to understand that and help those people connect the dots between what they're doing and showing them that there are meaningful outcomes from their work. Finally, stability, job security, right? The last several years have been crazy, and I think we can all appreciate feeling some level of job stability and security, feeling confident. Employees want to know their position's going to be there tomorrow, their leaders are doing the right thing, and that their organization is growing, right? In some capacity, or at least staying the same, right? That something good is happening. Because during times of change and uncertainty, again, that's going to impact everybody. If you think back to the furloughs of COVID, that was not generational, that was across the board. And you look now, AI, I mean, every other day there's an article in the news about how AI is taking jobs away, right? That's not generation specific. That fear can go to just about anybody. So really, just having that stability is something that's important to everybody. And from an organizational perspective, being transparent about change, even if you don't have all the answers, just sharing the information you can really go a long way. But now we're going to start segueing into some of those leadership strategies, right? And we're going to figure out that all of this stuff is not really generational after all. So this first is a quote that I just thought really resonated, and it says, generations are a lens through which to understand societal change rather than a label with which to oversimplify differences between groups. And I just thought that that was really important here because, again, as we've been talking about, it's about understanding that people have been through different things, and how that kind of impacts them and the things that they want in life. But it's not a reason to just oversimplify and say everybody of this particular group does this or needs that. It's so much more complex than that. So the first one is lead individuals and not stereotypes. Again, I talked about generational trends earlier. Those provide some insight, but should never replace getting to know your employees as people, right? Because when you rely on assumptions in any capacity, it's just going to frustrate people, especially those that don't fall into that bucket. So understanding that not everybody of a generation is going to fit the same norms, is going to be really important. But that's not enough. It's not enough for just you to do it, right? You have to challenge these things when you see them in your workplace, because chances are those of you on the call today, you might have some preconceived notions, everybody does, but you're not the only ones within your organization, right? So you have a role and expectation to challenge these things if you see them in the workplace. And if you see people just making these broad statements about groups of individuals, whether that's based on age or any other characteristic, that you challenge it and you bring it to light. So what are some things that you can do, right? Ask questions, be curious. I say this 1,000 times a day because it's true. Don't assume that you know things, right? Go into a conversation being curious, trying to learn something, asking people, what helps you do your best work? How do you prefer to receive feedback? What motivates you? What do you want to do professionally? How do you want to grow? And those are going to be things that help you connect with your employees and people on your team and understand how they want to work together. Having regular one-on-one conversations with employees, having conversations specifically around career and development, not performance. We have the performance conversation all the time, and that's great. But maybe just focus once in a while, maybe once a year, on how do you want to grow? How can I help you? Have things changed over the last year? And just having that regular conversation to make sure that you still understand what that person is interested in, what's challenging them, what makes them tick, and what motivates them. The next is setting clear expectations. So again, many generational conflicts are actually just expectation conflicts. Managers often believe that expectations are obvious when other people may not feel the same, right? So ask yourself, does everybody have a job description? Do they actually know what their job is? Did they receive training? Have they read through the policies and like organizational standards that we have? That's just one part of this though, right? So that's just a job and organizational expectations. But then on like a team level, right? Do people have the same norms and expectations? If you tell somebody, keep me updated or give me that report quickly, what does that mean, right? Because people have different definitions of quick and keep me updated. Some people think that that's a daily thing to keep me updated. For other people, maybe that's once a week. And again, there's not a right or a wrong here. It's making sure that we're on the same page. So when possible, when you're speaking to other people, try to use specifics so they know what you want when you want, and they can meet that expectation instead of assuming they know what it is. But across your team, even consider things like setting a response time, right? So maybe people have to respond to emails within 4 hours, customer requests within 1 hour, and a Teams message or a Slack message within 2 hours, right? Then we understand what's within and what is outside of that expectation. So again, an example could be that a manager views an employee as disengaged because they don't respond immediately to email. Well, perhaps where that employee came from, the expectation was you respond within a day. So they think that they're well on track and that they're doing just fine. They're responding in a timely manner when the manager doesn't feel that way. Because we can't assume that everybody we're working with had the same norms in the workplace that we've always had, right? We all come from different organizations. We all come from different backgrounds professionally. So those expectations might not be the same here for me at Ahola as they were at my past jobs, right? And so that's something that we have to learn, and we're either going to figure it out the hard way or somebody can tell us what the expectation is and we can know it up front. So whenever your team is experiencing some sort of frustration, right, try to dig down to the root cause, and chances are it's going to be a lack of an expectation or a lack of a norm. And if that's the case, great, you've identified it. Now work with your team to figure out what makes sense. Right? Work with your team to figure out what those response times should be. or when you should have an in-person meeting versus when you should have an email, right? And set those expectations to help alleviate some of that frustration and some of that conflict.
Tina, two things to add. One, for
Yep,
the email, just remember everybody reads an email in a different tone, and it might not
true.
even be the tone that it was sent in. So sometimes conversations are best, I personally feel, just from experiences. But then, and then back to job descriptions, if you have a job description, look back to see, all right, when was it actually updated? Was it 10,
Hmm.
20 years ago? Because I'm sure that's not actually their job description anymore, and you need to go back and look at that.
Right, definitely. The next is increasing communication skills. And this is not a topic that anybody should assume they have an A plus in, right? Because we're all guilty of some communication faux pas once in a while, right? We all slip up. People are quick to want to get their 2 cents in. Sometimes they're not even actually listening, right? But we need to catch these poor communication habits in the workplace and try to replace them with better ones. So, again, a quick example of what this could look like is instead of telling somebody, you need to communicate better with customers. Okay, what does that mean, right? Saying something like, walk me through how you handled that customer situation. That's going to force that person to explain their thought process to you, their problem solving to you. It's going to have them take ownership of the situation. And then from there, you can make improvements, but you can't just make a general statement like that and expect them to understand what they need to do. I will say that people tend to listen to people with the intent of how they're going to respond instead of to actually listen. Um, so you have to teach people to stop, ask follow-up questions, summarize what you heard, avoid interrupting people. I see this on a professional level all the time. Somebody just cuts somebody else off when they're talking, right?
I
And
don't know
that's
what you're
in
talking
and of
about.
its and that in and of itself creates conflict, right? If people don't feel like they're being heard because people are talking over them all the time, we all have to learn in an organization to pause and let somebody else talk. Once they're done, interject with what it is that we want to say, right? And if there is a disagreement, again, taking that curiosity approach, help me understand your perspective, comes off a lot better than what are you talking about, right? It's going to lower people's defenses. It's going to hopefully lead to a more productive conversation. Next is creating that cross-generational collaboration, right? Because this doesn't always happen organically within the workplace. And so by the nature of some people's jobs, their whole team or department might be folks in a same generation, right? So they might not get that visibility and exposure to people in other generations and get the benefits of that diversity. So these are some things you can do, right? Mentorship, we're all familiar with this. A more experienced and seasoned employee mentors somebody that's younger and newer in their career, maybe on topics like organizational history, industry knowledge, relationship building skills, whatever that might be, right? But there's benefits that come from that, of that knowledge transfer, succession planning. And then we have the flip side of that. So the reverse mentorship, where somebody younger is mentoring somebody older, right? And that might be on things like, again, maybe that is social media or technology, or maybe it's something like emerging industry trends, because maybe they're more adept at that because of them just coming out of school, right? So there's things like that that they can be sharing too, and that's going to create that mutual trust, that increase in innovation, that continuous learning. You'll see that for both of those. And then you have mixed project teams, right? And so sometimes you have to create teams that are more diverse, right? Because if just the same teams are working together, they're not getting those benefits. However, diverse teams don't work well when they're not properly managed. So, what do I mean by this? People have the tendency to find people who are similar to them. That's just a human nature. We all do it, right? So, we have the tendency to seek out people who share our views, share our values, who are similar to us. Um, and so by default, sometimes if you throw a bunch of people in a room who are very different, it may be hard for them to connect. And if you don't have an organization that allows people to feel comfortable in the workplace, that they feel comfortable being different and bringing out those differences, bringing their whole self to work, right? We're feeling that they can be comfortable being vulnerable, this isn't going to be super successful. But if you've nurtured your environment and your culture to that point, the benefits of it are invaluable, right? Because people are going to be able to rely on other people who have those different experiences and those different skills. It's going to make them stronger. And this is the reason why diverse teams have such a huge advantage when managed properly than teams that don't have that type of diversity. So I read an article lately and I thought this was really interesting. And it likened different generations to an orchestra. And it said, okay, so one generation is the strings, one is the winds, one is percussion, etc. And it said on their own, each group still makes really fantastic music. But when you put them all together, that's when you get that symphony, and that's when you get that aha, right? Of all of the different instruments playing together at the same time. And I just thought that was really interesting way to look at it.
Um, I wanted to
Yeah,
add to the mentorship part of it, if
sure.
just because I've seen it a lot when I go out and I talk with other companies, but if you have someone that has basically been with you for, 25 years or so, and they know the ins and out of everything about your company, if something happens, God forbid to them, or they decided that, today's the day I'm gonna retire and you don't have anything in place because there was no mentorship happening, where's it gonna leave you and your company? And is that gonna
Hmm.
take you, somebody that's running the business, away from growing it, to do all the everything else that this person was doing?
Right. Absolutely. So there's multiple benefits to doing it. Um, And then again, supporting flexibility, because this has become super valuable in the workplace across generations. And again, people usually assume remote work when you hear flexibility, but that's not the only option for flexibility, right? You can have scheduling flexibility. So that looks like maybe flexible start and end times, or a compressed work week, right? Maybe working 4 10s instead of 5 8-hour days. Different work arrangement flexibility. So again, that's more of your hybrid schedule, your remote work when it's appropriate, or other perks and benefits. So I know plenty of organizations that do summer hours. Hey, you make up a few extra hours throughout the week, you can take off a little bit early on Fridays. Or maybe flexibilities for appointments. Again, maybe companies that have paid parental leave or paid elder care leave, something of that nature to support their organizations, because people might need flexibility for different things based on the phase of life that they're in, but chances are everybody needs it in some capacity. And people appreciate it for different things, whether that's caring for a family member or going back to school or whatever it might be. And again, at the end of the day, organizations need to try to focus on the outcomes at work, not that everybody has to be there at the same time doing the same thing in person, right? Like how can we really add value and create flexibility within our workplace? And believe me, I truly understand for some organizations that's difficult. There are some jobs that cannot be remote. There are some companies that cannot flex their hours, and I understand and appreciate that. Um, Again, so that's why there's maybe some other things that you can discuss, or even again, just having those conversations with your employees to understand what do we want? What are the expectations? How can we support? And trying to find something that's mutually beneficial and effective. And then once you do put something in place, making sure that people are aware of what's available to them so that again, so hopefully somebody's not complaining that so and so's using too much vacation or that so and so is never there. And it's like, well, no, we have a hybrid workplace and that's completely acceptable. So everybody understands what those expectations are.
Um, I was
Yeah,
again sorry, always coming in at the end. But for the perks and benefits, something that I found one that was something that's way different than I had ever heard that one of my clients offers is that like they get their employees a certain amount of money at each like milestone, like at 5 and 10. I don't forget how much, but it's for traveling. Like it could only be used to travel. Um,
hmm,
they have to go take it somewhere. So like the person I was talking to, I think they were celebrating their 10 year maybe. But they gave I think I forget how much, but she took her family to on a cruise to Alaska for it. And I'm just like, well, that
nice.
is just an interesting out of the box perk of that I had never heard of before. That's great to offer to someone if maybe you can't offer everything else.
Right. True. Absolutely. No, that's really cool. Okay, everybody. So, kind of as we wrap things up today, again, what I want you to know is that the organizations that are most successful are not the ones that think they know how to manage baby boomers or manage millennials, right? It's not that they have that down. It's that they have an organization where they communicate clearly, they build trust, they adapt their approach, they listen to their employees, and they bring people with different experiences together, right? And so there's many different approaches that we've kind of talked about today. But at the end of the day, what I hope you're taking away from this is that there are not really generational conflicts, right? There's just workplace conflict. When you drill down into it and you get to the bottom of it, it's just a workplace conflict. And when organizations learn how they can handle those and address those with the right approach, then things start getting better. That conflict alleviates, and hopefully everybody can kind of work in that more cohesive environment. And so now we can turn it over to some Q&A if there is any.
Tina and Jordan, thank you so much for the conversation. That was great. Anybody who's on the call, the chat is open if we have any questions in our last couple minutes here that we would like to ask the experts over at Ahola. So you can pop it in the chat and we can go through there.
And while we're waiting on the chats to come in, everybody write down the August 28th. We are having a showcase at the Renaissance in Westerville to go over some HR topics. There's SHRM credits that are available. It is free, and you get to know Ahola. A lot of our clients will be there, and some of our COIs, and then some of our just amazing people from our Cleveland office. Tina, I don't think you're coming, right? This time?
Not this time. I'll be at the Cleveland one.
Fine, it's fine. But I know Terry will be there, so I'm very excited. And yeah, Hope actually said she would be willing to send out the link and stuff to you guys if it's something you're interested in coming to. It's just a great opportunity to meet people too.
Definitely.
Looks like we have just a question from Deb. Will the PowerPoint and audio be available for us for reference? It will, yes.
Jordan, was there anything you wanted to cover if we see if any more questions come in related to like our health check or Ahola in general?
Yeah. So we have a health check that you can do that kind of helps to see where you are in compliance for your HR. We understand HR can be very expensive. Maybe it's not something that you can afford to hire somebody in-house. But you can always, if you take this and you're looking at your score and you're like, oh no, I got a 0 out of 10. Give us a call. Let's talk about it. We are very flexible with working with you to get you to that point of where you need, because listen, it is for your employees, but it's also for and protecting your business as well. That's you need to have those checks and balances put into place.
Definitely. And you can always learn more about us at ahola.com. And we've got a bunch of other, regular upcoming webinars and stuff that you can always register for on our website.
And if I see you out and about at any of the events, please come say hello. If for some reason you can't come to the showcase, which is just like so rude, but it's fine. I would love the opportunity to meet with you guys. I just had an awesome time at the chamber event, the Women's Collective yesterday, and I would love to talk with you. Please reach out to me or Hola directly if you want to learn more about the HR, more about the generation workplace that Tina went over so graciously. Thank you for changing it up. And we would love the opportunity to talk more.
Excellent. Looks like we do have another question from Bill. Bill, I will unmute if you would like to ask your question.
Yeah. Hi. This is more of a statement than a question, but I really
Okay.
want to thank you for the presentation that you just put on. I saw this on my email talking about what the topic was, and I'm very interested in it. And I wanted to hear what was discussed and hear different perspectives. And one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to see how many people would like have their camera on, because Tina put a lot of work into this and it was some great stuff. And I just really wanted to let her, in my generation, it would be hard to give a presentation when you're not seeing people acknowledging and listening. And I just wanted to see in a topic like this kind of happen, what people would do. But with that being said, great presentation, great stuff. And thank you for doing it.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's funny, Bill, because I did see your camera on and I could see you nodding throughout, and it was actually very encouraging. So I appreciate it.
It was great stuff. I follow, I like, thank you.
Thank
Tina's
you.
awesome. Like I said, but to begin with, no, it was a great topic. Definitely, and
Appreciate it.
pretty much we're all in the same boat, just on how you want to approach it.
Yep. Any other questions, Nick?
That was
Wow, that
great.
was so nice,
Bill,
Victoria.
thank you. And Victoria also gave some kudos to you, Tina and
Oh,
Jordan. So thank you
awesome.
guys
Thank you.
so much for the conversation again. everybody on the call, if you do have additional questions, you can reach out to myself here at the Chamber. And we appreciate our friends at Ahola, and thank you for joining us. And we will see you at our next one. More information on the next Business Edge webinar will be available shortly. But thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.